Guys, the guest is here. Please settle down. Please settle down. The guest has already arrived. Divyansu, please clear that way. The guest and the vice chancellor are entering through that way. Kindly settle down.
Good morning, everyone. Especially, Assalamu alaikum. Namaste. Really great honor for us to host His Excellency Mr. Fouad Seniora. He is an elder statesman representing not only his country but the wider region. Has served in very, very high positions. His bio is with you. He was Prime Minister of Lebanon. Also has been active in parliament, an intellectual who has been writing a lot, speaking a lot, and involved in some of the most crucial incidents and events that have shaped the modern Middle East, or West Asia as we call it here. So it's really great privilege for us, for our students, sir, to be hosting you. And I want to also welcome His Excellency Mr. Rabi Narsh, the Ambassador of Lebanon to India, and we thank him for facilitating this extraordinary opportunity to learn for our students. Coming to the topic, I'll request the Vice Chancellor to maybe say a few more words about His Excellency Mr. Seniora, but I just wanted to share with you an initial few thoughts about it. One being, we tend to associate this region with far many more violent conflicts and wars than any other region in the world, right? So, and people have tried to give a general explanation for why it is that wars are so frequent and unstoppable in the Middle East, as opposed to other. Why is it so violent? I mean, there are many explanations. One, of course, is the role of external intervention and foreign powers, often associated with oil and the petroleum resources, the fossil fuels. There are other explanations. There are some who talk about the artificiality of the nation states that have been created in the region as a result of colonial divisions between the Europeans, and how the artificiality of the current national boundaries continue to be challenged by radical actors. There are some who talk about the creation of Israel as the main reason why there have been so many conflicts, either in favor or opposing this very, very seminal moment in the Middle Eastern history. There are some who talk about the cultural linkages across the region, which make one phenomenon, you cannot isolate a phenomenon to an individual country because it spreads quickly to others in this region, more uniquely than, say, in South Asia. So, for example, most recently ISIS, right? It may have originated in Iraq, but it has spread to many other countries in the region. And likewise, even the forms of rule, people have said that the authoritarian regimes is the reason why there is so much political frustration among young people, and that's why many of them resort to dangerous ideologies either secular or religious. So I know Excellency has been thinking and working on these problems, from as a kind of from the front lines. He has been a problem solver throughout his career. Has been a troubleshooter trying to douse these flames. So he's a kind of a peacemaker and has served his country with great distinction. And so it's a rare honor for us, really. I think for our students, we have any number of public lectures and events and seminars, but to learn from someone who served in such high offices and who was at the apex level in the politics, but also has a connection with the grassroots across the region. It's really remarkable. So thank you, Excellency. Thank you for being here. It's a real honor for us. And I'll now request the Vice Chancellor to address you.
A very good morning to all of you. First of all, I would like to extend a warm welcome to our very distinguished chief guest for this afternoon's lecture, Honorable His Excellency, and I would like to call him Professor Fouad Seniora. And I'll tell you why I'm calling that. As Sriram, our Dean, mentioned, that we do host a number of events and initiatives and lectures and conferences, workshops here on our campus. But there are moments when we host, very rarely, extraordinary individuals who have shaped the destinies and futures of their own nations, but also the world at large. Today we are hosting somebody like that. His Excellency, Mr. Fouad Seniora, the former Prime Minister of Lebanon, has had a very distinguished career and has worn many hats and has had a very distinguished career both in business as well as in leadership and of course in nation building. He has had a very solid academic qualifications from the American University in Beirut, but also I would like to see him as a part of our tribe in the university. He taught at the University of Lebanon as well as the American University Beirut, and all of that experiences shaped his ability to speak truth to power, both as an academic but also as a legislator, as a foreign minister, as a finance minister of his country, and later of course as Prime Minister as well. We are grateful to him for taking out time to of course come to India, but also to visit OP Jindal Global University. I also want to take this opportunity to welcome His Excellency Mr. Rabi Narsh, the Ambassador of Lebanon to India, who I would like to call as a friend of Jindal Global University for taking up this initiative to bring the Honorable former Prime Minister of Lebanon to our campus. I also want to thank and welcome other colleagues who have come from the embassy here, and I would like to extend a warm welcome to you as well. I will not take much time because we are looking forward to hearing this, what is promising to be an outstanding lecture on the theme, Possibilities of War and Prospects of Peace in the Middle East. But before I do that, I want to say that as young students of the School of International Affairs and other schools of our university, here you have an opportunity to look at the future. The world is today facing different forms of crisis. Most of it is due to the lack of leadership and most importantly, lack of farsightedness about understanding some of the significant problems that are facing the world. We are also having a situation where demagogic leaders in different parts of the world are not fully understanding and appreciating the complexity, the diversity, and the pluralism that is deeply embedded in both national cultures as well as global imaginations. So in this context, people like the leaders such as Fouad Seniora, the former Prime Minister of Lebanon, are uniquely situated to shape the destiny of their own countries, but also through their statesman-like conversations can shape the young minds like you. I would like to believe that many of you in this room who are pursuing the study of international affairs here have an opportunity to develop a worldview that is much more inclusive, that is much more understanding, but most importantly, that celebrates diversity and pluralism that is deeply embedded in our cultures. We don't have any other option but to recognize the inherent diversity and complexity among us. In fact, this aspect of recognizing diversity and complexity is the heart of the problem that we face either in India or in the world at large. And there is no better way than my own effort to refer to one of the work by a very distinguished philosopher and economist and a Nobel laureate from India by name Amartya Sen. When I was a student in Oxford in the year 1998, Amartya Sen had already received the Nobel Prize, and he was delivering a lecture at Oxford University on the theme Reason Before Identity. And the theme of the lecture was so compelling that I attended the lecture, and he started his lecture by narrating a story, and I'm going to tell that story. He said that, listen, he was coming into England, he was teaching at Harvard, he was coming to Cambridge, because Amartya Sen had been elected as the master of Trinity College in Cambridge University. So he was taking up that position. Amartya Sen, as you can imagine, looks like an Indian, of course, has an Indian sounding name, has an Indian passport. And so he had to, when he landed in the London Heathrow Airport, he had to sign a form where it was supposed to mention where his place of stay in England. And he wrote in that form that, he wrote his name and all the other details, passport number and date of birth and everything, nationality. And then in the place where his address of stay, he said, Master, Trinity College, Cambridge University. And imagine, he is already a Nobel laureate. He was a professor at Harvard. He was moving to the UK to take up the position of the mastership of Cambridge University. And Trinity College is known for having, most of their masters have been, Nobel laureates. So he approaches the immigration. There is a white man in the immigration, and he looks at Amartya Sen's form, and he looks at Amartya Sen, he looks at the form once again, and looks at the form and says to Amartya Sen, and clearly believing that he can't be the master of Trinity College. So he says, are you the friend of the master? And Amartya Sen looks at him, and then he's also a philosopher, and he began asking a question, can I be my own friend? And he began the lecture by saying that I, Amartya Sen, Hindu, vegetarian, cricket lover, economist, coin collector, and he began to narrate 50 identities of him as a person. And the theme of his talk was that we have increasingly come to a world where we are placing some of our identities more important than the other. And he was speaking to the people around the world who were persecuting others on the basis of religious identity, or historically, even in our own country, both religion and caste and even gender has shaped and informed our problems when it comes to identity. And so Amartya Sen argues that we need to reason before identity, and some identities that have become more important may not be as important. So he further articulates that as an economist, every economist around the world is part of his tribe. As a cricket lover, cricketers anywhere in the world is part of his tribe. As a vegetarian, vegetarians in different parts of the world could be part of his tribe. And so why should we emphasize one identity, which is religion or caste, more important than other identities? In that process, we undermine the holistic and pluralistic imagination of humankind. He later wrote a book entitled Identity and Violence, which more systematically and more rigorously argues about the need for celebrating pluralism, but also recognizing the complexity, the diversity of humanity. And so reason before identity is the only way by which we can understand and work towards developing everlasting peace in the world. And so, with those words, I would like to once again extend a warm welcome to our Honorable former Prime Minister of Lebanon, and also to all of you who have assembled here to hear what promises to be an extraordinary lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor. Now, without further ado, I request Excellency Mr. Seniora to kindly address the audience. We've been waiting for you, sir, for a long time. All yours.
Good morning. Dr. Kumar, members of the faculty, my dear students, I cannot tell you how much I really am privileged this morning to be with you and to talk to you and to meet with you. Especially you represent the future of your country, being young men and women and aspiring in such an environment to really assume in the years to come major responsibilities in your country. I would like to start by saying that I would like to thank you for inviting me to be with you this morning. I came to India. This is not my first visit to India. This is second my visit to India. That the first happened about 10 years ago, and I came in here by invitation to participate in a panel that took place at SDR, and I'm here today, and I'm really very happy to be. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak at your prestigious university on a question that has captured the attention of the international community in the last decade, namely the possibilities of war and prospects of peace in the Middle East, particularly in West Asia. It's a timely and pertinent topic that warrants thorough contemplation and calls for exploring ways and means of preparing for the years ahead. It genuinely makes me happy to address this auspicious group of scholars and students, as I have heard this morning and previously about the exceptional, outstanding reputation of your university, being a very young university, but quite vital in what it's doing. I really look forward to discuss the aspects of this crucial topic with you. And as soon as I finish, I am open for any question that you may have, that you'd like to discuss freely, with no hesitation on any matter. Because particularly the situation in West Asia is of crucial importance, not only to that part of the world, but again, to many other parts in the world, and particularly in that area of the Middle East. Dear students, dear faculty, today our world is suffering from a serious phenomenon known as the trust deficit disorder, as people are feeling troubled and insecure more and more every day. At present, trust is at a breaking point. Trust in national and international institutions, trust among states, trust in the rule-based global order, and within countries, people are losing faith in political establishments where polarization is on the rise and populism is on the march. Moreover, cooperation among countries is less certain and more difficult. Many people are turning inward, and multilateralism is under fire when the world needs it most, and needs a real commitment to rule-based order as well. Following the Arab Spring, which you might have heard of, that has turned into some countries into a stormy winter time, thus undermining some economies of the Middle East and undermining the long-term prosperity. Even though the present situation of these countries and that of the region as a whole is still pressing and unstable. Nevertheless, I believe that based on the strategic position of that region, its extensive natural resources, and vibrant population being all young, it will overcome its troubles so that its future prospects will become very attractive for cooperating with many of its neighboring countries, most noteworthy with India and with the rest of the world. Over several decades, the region suffered from the continuous failure of many Arab states in dealing with their socio-economic and political problems properly, which makes many question the status and position of this region at the global scene, while it is still in pursuit of justice, growth, and stability. The last decade witnessed major events and dangerous setbacks that led to the dismantling of the power of the state and the rule of law in Syria and in Yemen, as well as in furthering the complication and deterioration of the situation in Iraq and Lebanon, and as well in Libya and Sudan in Africa, being all Arab countries. All this has been going on in the midst of growing Arab void and the near total absence of Arab countries in playing any vital role in determining the fate of the region. Hence, giving the other regional powers, and especially Iran, Turkey, and Israel, a growing role in furthering the increased destabilization of the region. That has been taking place with many governments and leaders have been to a great extent responsible for mismanaging the ethnic and religious diversity of the region. And instead of using their diversities as an opportunity to enrich their countries, they turned it into an explosive crisis. My dear students, some Arab states have failed to manage and regulate their common relations with the Middle East region. That contributed to a new situation whereby non-state actors have thrived and started to play a much bigger role, feeding on and therefore feeding back violence and conflict, as it's currently the situation in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, and in Yemen. On the one hand, the instability in the region, in the Arab region, and the repercussions of the Arab Spring, combined with the major changes that are taking place regionally and internationally, resulted in magnifying the negative role of the two regional powers, namely Iran and Turkey. This is over and above the destructive role that is still being played by Israel in the Arab region that ultimately led to the announcement of the deal of the century, which you might have heard of. Iranian officials have made it very clear that Iran has its important influence in 4 Arab capitals, namely Baghdad in Iraq, Damascus in Syria, Beirut in Lebanon, and Sana'a in Yemen, politically and militarily. On the other hand, Turkey is interfering militarily in Syria along its southern border, and recently is becoming militarily involved in Libya. Anyhow, I believe that Iran is bleeding financially and economically and politically. Ultimately, I believe it will need to immediately attend and address these mounting problems. This troubled situation in the region has encouraged the regional and the global powers to use some of the Arab countries, especially Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Lebanon, as a field of combat rather than a medium of active collaboration, and a war zone rather than a zone for economic trade and prosperity that is starting to have its grave impact on the whole region and in pushing in towards unsustainable situations. My dear students, the Palestinian conflict remains to be the oldest unresolved crisis in modern history. And it is now back to the front with the announcement of the disappointing deal of the century that is claimed by President Trump to be a just solution to this over 1 century old conflict. Alas, the deal of the century is absolutely not a peace plan. Rather, it is a deal between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu to support each other in the upcoming elections in the US and Israel. As such, it is nothing but a false claim of a two-state solution, and is in fact an attempt to legitimize an apartheid state by implementing a perfectly planned and disgraceful ethnic and factional cleansing strategy. This deal is in conflict with the basic principles of the international law, and as well with all the respective international resolutions of the Security Council and the General Assembly of the United Nations. Besides, it is in conflict with the agreements that were made between the Israelis and the Palestinians in Madrid and in Oslo in the beginning of the 90s of the previous century. The deal of the century was announced by President Trump from Washington in the presence of the Israeli Prime Minister in a total and shocking absence of those who are the most concerned. The Palestinians were not there. But what endangers the prospects of a sovereign Palestinian state, thus making the situation even more complicated, is Trump's decision on Jerusalem, as well as the recent Israeli laws on the Jewishness of Israel. Added to it the disgraceful apartheid measures being adopted by Israel against the Palestinians, the cancellation of the US funding to the UNRWA, which is the relief agency of the United Nations for the Palestinians, the increased US acquiescence regarding expanding the Israeli settlements in the West Bank, the US decision on the annexation of the Syrian Golan Heights, that were occupied by Israel in 1967 to become under the Israeli sovereignty, as well as the Israeli determination of annexing to it the Jordan Valley, as stated in the deal of the century. My dear students, the American attempt of allowing Israel to claim an additional 40% of the lands of the West Bank, including Jerusalem, will lead to the creation of an isolated Palestinian archipelago that consists of over 200 islands. Imagine a state in the form of 200 islands in that small area, which are separated by 250 illegal Israeli settlements. These islands will most definitely suffer from further uprooting, discriminating policies, and apartheid measures that will be inflicted on helpless people by more than 750 Israeli military checkpoints. This so-called Palestinian state doesn't have the basic components of any sovereign and viable state. Moreover, it has no borders with any other country but Israel, and has no authority or control over its natural resources or political order. What's shocking in this outrageous deal is the fact that it will only precipitate in exposing the entire region and make it more susceptible for more disputes, conflicts, bloodshed, and wars. As loud and clear as it can be, the Palestinians undeniably have the right of conceiving a just, viable, and permanent political solution that serves them and saves whatever is left of their dignity after decades of suffering and resentment under the eyes of the international community. The Palestinians need the help and solidarity of all peace-loving nations today more than ever before. My dear students, today the entire Arab region is facing an alarming possibilities of conflicts. The international community seems to have forgotten the Syrian people, who were rightfully fighting to live in dignity. They paid dearly the cost of their uprising with blood, hunger, and resentment, as well as in the displacement of half of the Syrian population within and outside their country. Syria remains a serious human and security tragedy in the Arab region. While in Libya, several armed militias are supporting the government of national reconciliation that also has so far the blessings of the international community. Moreover, Turkey has recently interfered in favor of this government. On the other hand, the National Army of Libya under the command of General Khalifa Haftar in Benghazi is about to gain control over Tripoli after he successfully gained control over several regions in Libya under the pretext of protecting the country from further deterioration to save it from the militias. The tragedy in Yemen continues until this very moment, since it erupted in 2014, as the possibilities of further bloodshed between the government that is backed by the Arab alliance of the Gulf countries against the armed militias of the Houthis that have tremendous Iranian support, which is on the rise. The continuation of the Iranian intervention is a source of serious worry regarding the alarming possibilities of furthering the deterioration and disorder in and around the Arab Peninsula, and in the region of the Indian Ocean. Furthermore, the situation in Iraq, after years of battles and bloodshed against ISIS, is still tragic, as the Iraqis are suffering from the rule of a government that is heavily under the Iranian influence, who is meddling in the domestic and foreign affairs of Iraq. Moreover, the government of Iraq suffers from lack of good governance, the fact that as well led to the recent Iraqi uprising against decades of corruption and oppression and Iranian influence. Ladies and gentlemen, my dear friends, may I remind you that wars do not always happen when both sides of the conflict want it. Sometimes the war forces itself on both sides of the conflict due to certain uncontrollable mistakes or factors. This is exactly why it is so difficult or almost impossible to predict the possibilities of war in this part of the world or when will peace prevail. But let's not forget one important fact, that the status quo in this region will never be a sustainable solution in this region that has faced decades of injustice and underdevelopment. The young generations in the Arab world are tired of tensions, fear, and wars. They demand serious and effective solutions to the mounting problems they are suffering from, so that they can save their dignity and ultimately to be able to live in peace under the rule of law. My dear students, economic factors have always been a reason for waging wars throughout history. The main reason for waging wars were economic reasons. But economic reasons are necessary for building peace with neighbors based on common interests. It is estimated that by the year 2030, the population of the Arab world will become more than 500 million people. Definitely less than half that of India, but as part of that part of the world, it's quite a significant number. But the most interesting, as much as it is India now, the majority of these people are young and looking forward and aspiring to develop their countries that are rich in natural resources as well as in human capital. Let me remind you here that the tensions between countries and within countries are becoming contagious. They travel without passports, without visas, like what we hear now about the coronavirus. They don't require a visa to travel from one country to the other. But they spread these tensions, like the corona and others. They spread turbulences, confrontations, and ultimately fueling migration, which creates cultural shocks. These shocks eventually feed the ultra-right movements and fuel ultra-nationalism, as we are hearing about what's happening, ranging from Chile to the United States to England with the Brexit and other countries, even in Far East. This in turn nurtures extremism, xenophobia, and chauvinistic and racist attitudes that backfire and lead towards more extremism, violence, and terrorism. What we are witnessing nowadays is the spread of populist ideas that tickle the emotions of the masses and play on their instincts. The result is more isolationism and extremism, which, if left and unchecked, could lead to major international conflicts, terrorism, and possibly even to wars. Unquestionably, while the gap between the rich and the poor countries may have been reduced, but the gap between the rich and the poor within each country is widening. That's why we should work together, all of us, all the young people, to spread a culture of cooperation based on a strong will and determination to resolve crises and to end wars. Because at the end of the day, we are all both the haves and the haves not in the same boat. We either float and sail together, or we sink together. In the light of the above, let me conclude. In my opinion, the only way to re-establish back the strategic balance in the West Asia region and reinforcing the forces of peace is to march ahead with great resolve towards reinforcing justice and towards full respect of the international resolutions, and to adopt real inclusive policies promoting peace and stability, support development policies, and to promote growth and progress in the diverse societies of West Asia. Along these lines, let me suggest some ideas about the efforts that should be made to move along the following tracks. One, sticking to approaches that call for a two-state solution of the Palestinian conflict, which, as I said, is a 100-year-old conflict. Without an effective plan that guarantees the creation of a sovereign Palestinian state is only an illusion that gives the Palestinians a sense of false hope. It has become quite clear, ladies and gentlemen, that Israel cannot continue its expansionist policy. Neither can it continue to build more settlements, and must continue evicting the Palestinians out of their homeland or refusing to accept to implement the related Security Council Resolution number 242 and the Arab Peace Plan initiative of 202 that calls for a two-state solution. We should realize that the Palestinians can no more handle empty promises or peace compromises. Therefore, I tend to think that it's time for the Palestinians to adopt a new and different approach in dealing with the disgraceful deal of the century, as it doesn't offer any reasonable solution that guarantees the sovereignty and dignity of millions of Palestinians. There is a mounting tendency among the Palestinians to challenge the state of Israel with an offer of one democratic state solution, provided that this democratic and civil state guarantees equal rights and obligations to all its citizens, Israelis and Palestinians. Two, I believe that the Arab world has to make its position clear and firm in terms of standing up to the Iranian interventionist policy in the region, as well as to the threats of its branches in the region like Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon and in Syria, the Houthis in Yemen, and the Al-Hashd al-Sha'bi in Iraq. As the Arabs should clearly be standing up to the threats of Iran, I strongly believe that the Arab world should simultaneously and sincerely extend a hand towards Iran in response to every serious positive gesture or friendly position expressed by Iran. In this regard, I believe that sooner or later, the politics of fatigue are going to play its role in the region, because the various countries in the region, and particularly Iran, cannot continue allocating substantial resources away from its productive economic sectors and away from the real pressing and growing and highly explosive needs of the Iranian people. The same somehow applies to the people of the Arab region. In this respect, I'd like to draw the attention that there are plenty of common interests and benefits that are there and need to be enhanced between the Arab world and Iran that are good, beneficial to both the Arab world and Iran, and as well to all neighboring countries, of which India in particular stands a great chance in participating in the effort of building peace, growth, and prosperity in the West Asia region. 3, the need to empower the Arab moderates and the secular forces in the region. I repeat, the secular forces in the region. This means calling on the religious authorities to work on creative, inclusive, conscious societies that believe in diversity, respect for others, and peace as the diversity in the Arab countries could conciliate a new moderate secular system based on the respect and protection of civil liberties and religions. It has to be clearly stated. It has to be clearly stated in here, my dear students and faculty, that the Arab countries need to adopt a new approach that highlights the values of hard work, discipline, productivity, and that encourages critical thinking. The Arab countries need a religious discourse that rises up to the level of the fast-changing world, a discourse that is adapting instead of regressing, and that opens the door to our new generations to be at peace with others, though correcting the misconceptions about Islam that have been planted in some heads by some diabolic minds. In brief, Arabs and Muslims do not want to scare the world, but as well, they don't want to be scared of it. My dear students, it is important in this regard to remember that the populations of developing nations are large potential consumers for the developed world, and that they represent new engines for growth. As their economies develop, so does their purchasing power. At the same time, as they resolve their domestic and regional conflicts, they become less of a risk to global stability. Therefore, it behooves the developed world to work to resolve regional crises wherever they exist, including and particularly in the Middle East and the West Asia region, where the ongoing Arab-Israeli conflict continues to hinder socio-economic development and economic growth and foments extremism. This requires sincere and diligent efforts to resolve this conflict as well as the Syrian crisis. the instigators and the perpetrators of these conflicts, which contribute to a plethora of negative repercussions, must not be allowed to continue to act with impunity. By the same token, leaders of developing nations are called upon to exercise good governance and to focus on advancing the knowledge economy for their countries. As well to the developing countries by improving the level of education, improving facilities, and encouraging the development of new and innovative software and the state-of-the-art digital products and services. These efforts should be coupled with structural reforms that reinforce the social safety nets that are crucial for protecting the less privileged from the slow but definite negative effects of globalization. Left unresolved, these conflicts would continue to fester, and people who feel that they are at the receiving end of injustice would wallow in frustration and in anger. They end up adapting radical ideas and resorting to desperate measures. Moreover, resources that go towards socio-economic development end up directed at sustaining a war economy, which exacerbates poverty, illiteracy, and disenfranchisement. This provides fertile ground for extremism that threatens global stability and world peace. My dear faculty and dear students, the divide between the rich and the poor is one of the biggest threats to global stability. Bridging this divide is the fastest and the most efficient means of curbing extremism and radical nationalism. And investing in education and in social and economic development in developed nations is the fastest and the most efficient means of bridging this divide. I strongly believe, my dear students, that there are great opportunities and benefits to the West Asia region and to the world at large, and to particularly to India, in restoring moderation and moving away from populism, extremism, and discrimination, and in turn restoring stability and peace to the West Asia part of the world and to all the nearby and friendly countries and the world at large. This is our only hope. This is our only choice. This is our only redemption. Thank you, my dear students, for listening. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Thank you for the standing ovation as well. A very candid and self-critical look at the reasons why the Middle East has been festering with violence and war. I think he raised a number of pertinent points, but I want to also apologize because I skipped a very important person whose remarks should have preceded Excellencies, Ambassador Rabi Narsh, Ambassador of Lebanon to India. He also happens to be a research student of Jindal School of International Affairs. It's a real honor for us to have partnered with the Embassy of Lebanon to bring this amazing event to this campus. So maybe because Excellency has already made his remarks and the students will have questions, we will first go with Q&A, and then after it's over, I'll request Ambassador of Lebanon to kindly deliver his remarks, followed by the remarks of Professor Amoura, our Vice Dean, at the end. So let's open up for Q&A. We can take maybe 5 minutes of questions, 5 to 10 minutes. Yes, Avirat, please. Only questions directed, not general comments, please, because we have less time.
Excuse me. Yes. So it's been an honor, absolute honor, hearing from you. So it's wonderful that you spoke of, sorry, yeah. So it's wonderful that you spoke of Turkey, the recent events. When we spoke of the recent events in Turkey and the intervention. So I just wanted to ask you, as part of the peace process, do you think that Turkey should withdraw from maybe Syria because it's kind of militarizing Idlib, and that's going to maybe worsen the situation? What do you feel about that? Because the Erdogan has this vision of maybe recreating the glory of the Ottoman Empire. So what do you have to say about that?
Okay, good. Can we take a couple more questions, please? Yes, that side. Girl student. Third row, please.
أول شيء يعطيك العافية وزير. إيه واحدة. Should I ask my in Arabic or in English?
You should ask in English so that everybody can understand.
Okay.
You've already shown that you know Arabic and you're from that
First of all, thank you for coming and talking. And second of all, I would love to know what do you think about the current situation in Lebanon that's going on right now? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This row, please. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the wonderful lecture. My question is, sir, Hezbollah has evolved significantly over the past. Hezbollah has evolved significantly over the past few years, and they have increased their influence. They have increased their influence in Lebanon also. So my question is, so as we know, Hezbollah was founded by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, and as we know, Qasem Soleimani until recently he headed the group. So after his assassination, so how do you think that changes the equation for Lebanon? How does it change the equation for Lebanon?
After General Soleimani's assassination. Yes, sir. Thank you. I think maybe one more. Can we take one more? This side.
Thanks a lot, sir, for coming over here. My question is that with the current situation in Yemen and the failed idea of a nation state, is a two-state solution the only way that we could make peace in the region?
Okay, good, sir. I think any more?
Thank you. First of all, I'm impressed of the quality of the questions. Thank you. This tells the extent of your diverse and wide scope knowledge of what's happening in the West Asia region and world affairs. First of all, regarding Turkey. Well, in principle, and to cut the story short, I'm against any intervention in the domestic affairs of any Arab country, neither by any of its neighbors, neither by any Arab country in any other Arab country. Now, what is happening? Let me tell you about one thing that happened yesterday when we were actually having a discussion. And there was a member attending the conference and in the panel, he was an Iranian. And he said that we are against the American intervention in the region, and that's why we are really afraid and we are against. And I said, in answer to his, let's say, remarks, I said there is a certain saying that says, you meet your destiny on the road that you try to avoid. That Iran has been trying to meddle in the affairs of the region in Iraq, and that's what I mean. The Iranian officials, I'm quoting them, is that we have an influence over the domestic and the international Beirut, and Sana'a. I said, in their attempt to really fight American imperialism and intervention, look what happened. How many new American bases have been already established in the region around Iran? Now there are bases in Turkey, in Kuwait, in Bahrain, in Qatar, in the Emirates, in Saudi Arabia, in Oman. What success can we hope about this theory of trying to avoid an American intervention? We ended up in that much intervention in the affairs of the region. That's, I am completely against this thing of intervention because this is something you try to avoid. Let's say, especially what happened with Iran since the beginning of the revolution, at the days of Khomeini. Before I go to that, let me tell you very frankly, Iran is a fact of geography, and one has to accept that and cooperate with Iran on matters pertaining of the growth and stability and prosperity of the region, but not at the expense of meddling with the domestic affairs of the region or at the expense of the sovereignty of any country in the region. I believe that it is the theory that was started in 1979 with the coming of Khomeini is the theory of exporting the revolution. And that's what we have to deal with. Are we dealing with a state that is a responsible state or with a revolution? Which means that, according to the theory of Wilayat al-Faqih, the right of the supreme leader in Iran to have an influence and interference in the affairs of the various countries or of those who are followers to that supreme leader, which definitely ending up in creating more instability in the region and in the wasting of resources. Try to imagine how much resources have been wasted in that region. What could have been really happened had these resources been employed and invested for the betterment of the life of the people there? Trillions of dollars and more than 40 years have been wasted on fictitious wars that ended up in instabilities in the region and in more polarization, in more extremism, in more populist regimes. Nothing has been achieved. Look at the life conditions of, let's say, these micronations. Has it been improving? Has been the level of the standard of living improving? Standard of education, has it been improving? These are the, let's say, the indicators that we have to look at to see whether there has been an improvement in the living conditions as well as quality of life that we are. Lebanon. Let me tell you about, let's say, first of all, the importance of the West Asia region and the importance of the Middle East and the curse of the Middle East. See, the Middle East is the region that connects three continents. Anybody, any nation wants to move from west to east to west, south to north, north to south, would have find, and you find out that this has been going on for years and years. Since several millennia, there has been lots of conflicts and feuds and wars that have been going on. It is high time that we learn the lesson and try to avoid the continuation of war and conflicts based on the very simple fact, accepting the other. You have to realize that the other is different, but you have to accept it and to live with it and to try to coexist with it. And that is possible. You see, in the history of Europe and Africa, Asia, we had at one time the case that really prevailed in Andalusia, in the, let's say, 11th and the 10th century, 11th century, 12th century, where the followers of three religions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, they managed, and they coined a term at that time of what you call it convivencia, the living together. العيش المشترك. That means living, accepting the other, coexisting with them, accepting that they're being different. But it is like mosaic. You see, mosaic is, I mean, we have lots of it actually in our part of the world. Probably you have something like this in India. Mosaic. It's pieces of stones are projected together, assembled in a way, they have different colors, they become very beautiful pictures. But if you dismantle it, its components, it becomes of no value whatsoever. They are just pieces of stone. This is what really enriches a country. And you have here something of the story in India, being really diverse. You have to enrich your culture with this diversity, with the living of the other, with the living together, accepting the other, accepting they are different. Like the pieces of the mosaic. Lebanon is as well like this. And when the Lebanese were left alone, they managed to excel. And they managed to be everywhere in the world. You as Indians, wherever you go in the world, you find Indians, isn't it? You are definitely, how many times? How many times Lebanon? We are only about 5 million in Lebanon. You are 1.3 billion. How many?
200 times.
200 times?
Yeah.
Huh? Even more?
Even more.
Anyhow, we are like an incubator, and you can really learn from this, and you can learn much from you. Lebanon definitely has passed through difficulties, being as well subject to intervention always that has been taking place from Israel because of the Palestinian Israeli conflict that led to the expelling of a large number of the Palestinians out of Palestine. So they exiled actually in Lebanon, Syria, and in many other parts of the world. And the problem is still there unresolved. That was, again, the source of instability, again, part of the intervention that has been going on from the rest of Arab countries, definitely has affected Lebanon. Lebanon came to agree among all its population on that was called at that time the Taif Agreement, among all the population of Lebanon, to build a country of diversity, but respecting the independence and the eternity of Lebanon as a state, and in being an Arab country at the same time. That has been going on. But in the meantime, there are problems in Lebanon that we have been suffering, which is sometimes call it micro ambitions, and macro consequences. Micro ambitions of certain individuals, sometimes they are trying to achieve something, but at the expense of the majority. That was really what we had been facing. And again, because of some populist policies and insistence and resistance to reform. And let me tell you something out of my personal experience. And since I came to office as Minister of Finance, I adopted the policy of reform. But reform, let me tell you something, it is a journey, an eternal journey, continuing one. It is not something you do once. It is like living in your house. If you don't dust your house every day, after a week you cannot live in it. Reform is a continuous journey. And reform, you resort to it whenever you can. And not, as I was talking to Mr. Kumar, and not when you become obliged to do it. Why? Then it becomes extremely costly and extremely painful. Because reform means change, adaptation to change. There is a certain saying by one of the caliphs in Islam. He said, raise your children in a different way than the way you were raised. Because they are going to be members of a different world than you are in now. This is preparing them for change, adapting for change. So this is something that we have really suffered in Lebanon because there hasn't been acceptability to carry on the necessary reforms, whether they are political reforms or economic, administrative, and social reforms. We are suffering from that. And this has resulted with some sort of an economic crisis that we are suffering from. And I can say from here that I believe that there is still a way out of this situation we are in. But it is exactly like somebody who is becoming impatient and has some complications. He has first to acknowledge that he is sick.
Excellency, forgive me if you can speed up your responses because the students will have their classes, and so if you can kindly give shorter responses, please.
Hezbollah and influence in Lebanon. Yes, Hezbollah has an influence in Lebanon. It has actually been good credit goes to him in maybe fighting the Israelis when they actually invaded Lebanon in 1978 and 1982. But at that time, the rationale of Hezbollah was that against the Israeli occupation. But later on, after the Israeli occupation, they left the country, except for certain parts of Lebanon. They turned their pistols towards the Lebanese, and they became interfering in the domestic affairs of the country, and they are doing this on behalf of Iran. So that's the thing, actually, what Hezbollah is doing, and this is actually resulting in instability in Lebanon because they became a state within a state. And as you know, they say that if there are two captains in one ship, the ship will sink. The same thing applies to a state. If there are two states within a state, then you will not be able to rule. The fourth question was about the two-state solution. I really said that all the international resolutions are for a two-state solution. And a two-state solution living in peace, recognizing each other, and trying to coexist and cooperate together, and at the same time coexisting with the rest of the Arab world, and which actually the Arab Peace Initiative was based on accepting Israel as a state in the region, and after actually the creation of a Palestinian state. Now, after what has been going on, in the sense that the building of settlements in the West Bank, whereby actually the proposal that we've heard about the deal of the century, it ended up with no solution. It is actually a recipe for more conflict. So that's why I think with the proposal that is being now exchanged by some Palestinians, because at the end of the day, we as Arabs, we will adopt everything that the Palestinians themselves would like to have. So what we are proposing is a one-state solution. Actually, the very idea of Israel, when it was really established, it was supposed to be a secular state for all the people who believe in democracy. And now they are trying to really defend the Jewishness of the state and more of an extremist group of people. That's why actually is not really a solution. I'm saying that this idea can be challenged to Israel by proposing a one-state solution, a democratic one, a civil state that the residents of which are Israelis and Palestinians, and they can live in peace together. This is the idea that's being now promoted among some Palestinians. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Thank you. The two things that stood out for me, one was, despite the Iranian influence, he said that Arab states must and societies must reconcile with Iran and work with Iran and look for a modus vivendi. I think that's a very important. And the second one is the one-state solution. Both of these are unorthodox views because many in the region continue to believe in the old paradigm that we must challenge Iran and we must challenge Israel. But definitely, Excellency has, I think, thought through these with the wisdom and with the the seniority and all the years he has seen as a policy maker. And it means a lot that somebody like him is saying that new ways of dealing with the old problems are required. Without further ado, I request our special guest, Ambassador Rabinash. our great friend and supporter, Ambassador of Lebanon to India, to kindly share a few thoughts, and then we will conclude with Professor Amoura.
Good afternoon. Well, this speech was supposed to precede His Excellency's lecture, and it was supposed to be like a small prelude to the lecture and the speaker as well. Now that it is after it, it might be somehow modified. Anyway, Prime Minister Seniora was beyond recognition, and I was not about to introduce him by his biography, but just was sharing some thoughts. And it's at the same time, it's not concluding remarks, because my dear friend Professor Amoura will do this. So it's just like Professor Sholia said, sharing some thoughts with you. Your Excellency Fouad Seniora, our former Prime Minister, Professor Raj Kumar, founding Vice Chancellor, my dear friend, or dear friends, of course, Professor Sriram Sholia, Dean of JSIA, Professor Amoura, Vice Dean and Director of the Center for Middle Eastern Study, dear deans, professors, students, and distinguished guests, my colleague, Mr. Ziad, Professor Jah, also, dear professors. Every time I visit this campus, feelings of joy and excitement overwhelm me. Maybe because I'm a student also here, and I remember Professor Jah when many times he said, well, Ambassador, you made us confused by the way how to receive you, because as a student, we don't normally receive students at the gate and then escort them to the Vice Chancellor room and treat them as VIP. So you confuse us, but as Ambassador, we do that for you. So I'm sorry for the confusion, Professor. And maybe today I even gave you more confusion, being also escorting His Excellency, our former Prime Minister. Actually, of course, I have built friendly relation with many faces here at this eminent institution, and I have established links of respect and channels of exchanging thoughts and opinions, but also because I sense an air of liberty in this university. Knowledge, as is said, liberates you, and this is one of Gender Global University aspirations. Yet my excitement today is multiplied, because it's in the same distinguished campus that a renowned leader from my country is meeting Indian and international knowledge seekers in an atmosphere of proficiency, candidacy, and free thinking. Prime Minister Seniora, as you all know, is a well-known politician, but also maybe less known as academic and lecturer. He has lectured in many different Lebanese universities and also international universities. So I believe to him this should be one of the most heartwarming events of his current visit to this lovely nation. His Excellency has talked about war and peace in the Middle East. Although this topic has been exceedingly tackled, but coming from an experienced politician who has been one of the policymakers and one of the critical links in the complicated networks of communications, would definitely, or have definitely, I'm sure, added new dimension to this topic. Prime Minister Seniora led Lebanon, or led the executive authority of Lebanon during one of the most critical times in the recent history of Lebanon. It seems actually that Lebanon has lots of those critical times, one of which we are experiencing currently. But the time Prime Minister Seniora headed the government was remarkable in its local, regional, and international implications. Suffice it to mention that he held his position after the weighty historic event of Rafiq Hariri's assassination that changed the face of the region. It was also during his tenure that Israel waged the July 2006 war against Lebanon, which ended by the UN intervention and United Nations Security Resolution 1701. His tenure of the premiership also witnessed the civil unrest in Lebanon in May 2008 that led to Doha Agreement, and which is also some critical time at that period. And it also has its implications on Lebanon's policy. As a member of political movement with political affiliations and visions, Prime Minister Seniora might be a controversial political leader, a staunch defender of his views, a patient negotiator, and a solid challenger. Only yesterday, at a dinner, a common friend, he said to His Excellency that, Your Excellency, I would rather call you the firmer Prime Minister of Lebanon rather than the former Prime Minister of Lebanon, being known for his firm affiliation to his principles. So, distinguished audience, I only want to seize this opportunity to share thoughts about Lebanon, particularly with many of you here, dear friends, who frequently ask me about the situation of this beautiful country. Lebanon, as His Excellency has mentioned, has been blessed in many ways. Its nature, its location, its weather, beautiful landscapes, civilizations, and diversity of its people. And if you want, ask Dr. Siram Sholia, who visited Lebanon only last year, and he was fascinated by his visit. And by the way, I encourage you all to visit Lebanon. It's a beautiful country. Yet, these same blessings, or part of, became at certain times the curse of Lebanon, which we call the curse of significance. In this small country, strategic games of nations have frequently played out, and it has become like the new pleasure of our eminent philosopher, Khalil Gibran, that most of you know, who wrote. He wrote once a small verse called The New Pleasure. He said, "This last night, I invented a new pleasure. And as I was giving it the first trial, an angel and a devil came rushing toward my house. They met at my door and fought with each other, the angel and the devil. They fought with each other over my newly created pleasure. The one crying, 'It is a sin,' and the other, 'It is a virtue.'" This is the situation briefly in Lebanon, as I see it. Let me end with a positive remark. It might be rather cloudy over the beloved gem of the Mediterranean for now. However, the sun shall prevail while darkness diminishes, and Lebanon will escalate back up and take its rightful position. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Yes, we have high hopes that stability and order and justice will come to Lebanon soon. Last but not least, I request our Vice Dean, Professor Abdul Fattah Moura, to deliver his concluding remarks.
Just to cut it short, because time is short, I will welcome everyone, but just to my dear students whom I taught last year a course titled War, Peace, and Diplomacy in the Middle East. Having read, and heard this very important title of Possibility of War and the Prospects of Peace in the Middle East, I wondered from the very beginning, is it future wars, full-fledged wars, global wars, confrontation, or, my God, this is disaster? Because many people, especially if we follow Talal Abu Ghazali, Center and Research, he is predicting that global war and confrontation between the two superpowers and even the world will break up during this year. This is horrible. But what brought my attention, it is that possibilities and the prospects are referring to prediction. But prediction should be based on data, facts, and figures. Apart from that, wars are already going on in the Middle East. For the past, if those students know that the Middle East so far has witnessed more than 12 interstate wars. And now we can see that the past 9 years have witnessed different kinds of wars. Why? Intervention is not from one single party. Intervention is from everybody in the internal affairs of a state. And that intervention, he who enters first will have to have a resistance. Resistance has never been in the history of nations a bad thing. Had it not been for the resistance of peoples, peoples would not have achieved their independence, dignity, and security, and so on. It is really not music to the ear to hear that some forces, I don't want to mention where they are, but in the Middle East, that are nationals of that country, do resist occupation and invasion and occupation. And it is not really to live with a state we have, yes, not to interfere. Intervention, again, according to international law, has many meanings and many sides and so on. Sometimes non-intervention is intervention, and non-intervention to prevent war and the crimes against people is intervention. Now, it is really very, very strange. There is no doubt there is diverse, perspectives to understanding this type of wars and the possibility of peace. But the other thing which I would like to ask, what type of peace? Is it the just and comprehensive peace? Or is it only food for thought? It is a peace meal, have this, translated into peace deals. And the peace deals which you have seen, Oslo, Wadi Araba, and also Camp David, and also even up till now, after the Anglo-American intervention in the region, in Iraq, in Sudan, in Syria, in Yemen, in Libya, and the founding also of what they called national unity government supported and backed by the United Nations. That's fine. But has there peace been there? Why there are also problems in Iraq? Why there are, again, although there is a government, in Libya as well. Now, in Yemen, but even in Lebanon, my dear country, I have many relatives in Lebanon, and Lebanese have many relatives. I come from Tartus, which is very close. Even, the Americans and the the Western world tried to, which there is, this constitutional system and so on, which have been long standing. Why is it now, if it works for stability, security, and peace and coexistence, which is excellent, but the experience have shown that they failed. But if it did, why it has come all of a sudden in Lebanon? This is to destabilize the region. This is the secret behind that is, yes, implementation of a policy of how to dominate and control the decisions of people. Don't forget what Kissinger has said. To control oil and people, he who controls oil and people will control nations in the future. Will control resistance. They don't want to achieve really just and comprehensive peace. The issue itself is very complicated. The Middle East is very complicated, and this diversity, in order not to take much time, I will just tell you why diversity of culture, which is we have to live with. We have to respect the culture, belief of the people. And that culture, just for that. Have you heard of the owls? Owls in the West, they look at it as a very good sign of good and fortune. But if you look at it from what the Western people, Middle Eastern people look at it, it is a sign, it is an omen of death, an omen of killing, of disaster. It's not. In Greece, right, they look at it as the goddess of fortune. We are looking it from our own side, that experiences of imposed post-armed conflict and major wars, imposed peace, have all failed. From Westphalia 30-year wars, European wars, First World War, Second World War, up to the war in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya. We have to see that peace has certain bases and foundations. Respect of the people, sovereignty of the state, international law, negotiation. The third point is why peace? Why diplomacy? Where is diplomacy? I mean, the role of diplomacy. Diplomacy has become an old tradition. It is now might is right. This is what they have told the people. And to drive away the evil from you, you have to be prepared how to face the mighty aggressive and how to work. What has happened in Turkey? See what's happening. I am pleased to inform you that the Syrian, I'm not speaking politics now, I have nothing to do with the politics, but it's just watching the news, which is a fact. Syrians have managed to liberate Aleppo countryside, most parts of Idlib, and the Erdogan system, whom I know, and Erdogan himself, whom I know very well and met him many times, is really in a swamp, doesn't know what to do, how to get out of this. How? Interventionist, policy and different pretext. National security. Okay, this is the right of everybody. If you have concern for your national security, I should have concern for my national security. But does your national security allows you to go to Libya and to send your troops there, to Sudan, also to Qatar and to Djibouti and so on? Is that national security? Our problem is that we have to think ahead and not to try to rationalize the irrational and demonize the irrational. We have to look forward, as President Bashar al-Assad has recently said, being asked a question about what will happen to those, Turkish forces being engulfed and surrounded, besieged by the Syrian army. He said, if they want to go, we will let them go. What about your relation with the Arab world and the Arab countries and the brothers? He said, we are still brothers and we will remain brothers. And we look forward, not backward. Let's think how to preserve humanity, social, political rights, and how to build the just and comprehensive peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Amora. Indeed, intervention is a controversial topic, especially in the Middle East, and there are multiple forces intervening, and we should carry the discussion forward in the classroom. I now request Vice Chancellor, Professor Rajkumar, to honor His Excellency Fouad Seniora, former Prime Minister of Lebanon, with Jindal scarf and Jindal. Thank you, Excellency. Thank you for being here.
Excellency, normally when a distinguished visitor comes, we give one scarf, either the summer scarf or the winter scarf. Very rarely we make an exception and give both the summer and the winter scarf. I'm going to present the winter scarf as well.
This is the spring.
Thank you, everybody. Please give a standing ovation to Excellency, and please wait until he departs.